George Dube, BDO. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me.
So, George, I've been doing Facebook Lives, YouTube Lives. We've got an event coming up on the next 10 days from now, anyways, our R4 conference. But that's not what I'm here to talk to you about per se. You're going to be at the event, but you sent me a title of conversations that we need to have, and it was titled something along the line of Crippling Penalties, Sneaky Rules, and New Tax Sets to Sideswipe Unsuspecting Real Estate Investors. And that's from 2022. So anytime I can take a shot at CRA, at our federal government, I'm happy to do that. But we did talk about this a while back. And so let's give listeners a kind of a peek into what we're talking about in this conversation about these darn sneaky tax guys, girls, people, whatever.
Yes, and it's something where initially the budget comes out, and typical to most annual budgets, I'm sure it's only the accounting nerds that like to look at that, and people checking out to see if they're got any funding for their particular industry, for example, or their geographic area. But anyway, this one section was dealing with effectively what I'm going to call non-resident owners of real estate in Canada, and to some degree piggybacking on some of the municipal provincial type of rules, trying to uh, really tackle, in their eyes, a problem of not having enough housing available for people.
Yeah, and this is connected to foreign buyers, correct?
Correct.
That's a direct connection to foreign buyers. They're trying to find the reason, like everybody's trying to solve the housing problem, and they seem to think it's going to, let's just blame one. It's the investors, it's the foreign investors.
Yes.
It's like the blame game.
Absolutely.
And anyway, so they unpacked all of this, and so because this is an important one. This is what people need to understand this.
And what catches people off guard, so okay, it's non-residents and whatnot, that doesn't apply to me, whatever, next. What's the score of the hockey game? Let's move on here. And to a degree, I think a lot of us were thinking that till we saw the initial draft legislation last summer and said, pardon me, was there some type of miscommunication I missed? And as we get closer to the deadlines, this relates for 2022 and presumably will be a go forward basis, but we didn't get the forms, for example, until about 2 weeks ago. And so now, yes, we had some adjustments and whatnot to the legislation. We were anticipating a lot more in terms of adjustments to it.
Yeah.
That did not come through to this point in time. But again, overall, I'd like to tell people there are a significant number of investors, and for that matter, even non-investors, that are going to be shocked that they have to file this new return. And not only that, but probably, particularly the first year, there are going to be a lot of people that miss that. And so the penalties applicable, if chosen to apply, are devastating.
Yeah, so they're big penalties. So in other words, if you don't say, well, no, I don't fall into that category, you have to check the box. You actually have to do the paperwork. Do you think it'll be online? It won't be hard paper, I don't imagine. Is it going to be online, or is it a hard draft? You're talking about the forms.
There is an online version. They're supposed to be.
Yeah, not there yet.
Again, they were just struggling trying to get that to be released. I know in the software, for example, that BDO uses with our tax returns, we've been told to expect that March 11th, if I recall correctly. So needless to say, we haven't seen it yet in terms of the online version. I think behind the scenes, the CRA does a really probably a good job in terms of trying to let the software producers get a little bit of a head start, etc. So I know our team has had a bit of a run at that. But anyway, still the point is it's pretty last minute to be addressing this.
Well, I think you've made a perfect point, which is number one, it is last minute, which is just, to me is pretty unprofessional, and it just speaks to quality of our CRA. That's a totally different conversation. But then the other side of it is like you say, people are going to look at it, well, no, it's foreign buyers. that's got nothing to do with me. I'm good. I live in Canada. I'm a resident. I've got all the stuff. And you're saying that could be true, but you're still obligated to check the box that says this doesn't apply to me. And if you don't check that box, and CRA in fact does have these hard deadlines, then you're going to be defending yourself in terms of they're going to be issuing a penalty or something that says, no, you're bad. And it's like as high as 10 grand or something.
That's a starting point too. So for a corporation that does not file on time or starts to do a variety of things incorrectly, we start at 10 grand. And then depending on the situation, we've got 3% per month penalties, 5% per month penalties. And then we start getting into some negligence penalties and these penalties and those penalties. And not that even in the normal income tax act, we've got some super duper penalties that rarely are applied, but occasionally. It's similar to jail time.
Yeah.
And in this legislation as well, no question, there's jail time involved.
Wow.
Whether that is ever applied or not is another matter. I can't imagine it, particularly the first year, but it's something where, yes, Revenue Canada as well has some discretion as to whether to apply certain penalties. And I myself personally not looking to rely on somebody's goodwill to say, no, George, you look like a fine, outstanding citizen.
Goodwill or good judgment, by the way. So, it's interesting around that. And I can't help but think at some level, they want, government wants to be taken seriously because they know it's a controversial topic. They know so many people, first-time home buyers particularly, are saying we don't have supply because it's all those nasty foreign investors. They're eating up whatever percentage or number that they think there are. So I can't help but think it's a little bit more politics than it is policy, and that there's some saber rattling in terms of this is how harsh it's going to be because we take it so darn seriously. That's my story. I've got nothing to verify that with or even to base it on other than, a few years of kind of watching sometimes how CRA and the feds work out these things. I don't know if you have an opinion of that. I know you're an accountant, so you're trying to be cautious, but what's your thought?
And again, my personal view, and I have absolutely positively nothing to rely upon this, it is I don't think they're going to enforce the penalties as harshly by any means in the first year.
Yeah.
But again, I don't want to have to rely on, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't know. And because of those penalties that are possible to apply, just a starting point, we're not going to have a lot of our RAIN members that are keen on the concept of starting penalties off at 10 grand.
Yeah.
And I guess in fairness, for those that are individuals, it starts at 5 grand. So they get a real deal from the Department of Finance. In fairness, it's not so much Revenue Canada, it's the Department of Finance and the government in power. Revenue Canada is enforcing the rules and interpreting, but they're not per se initiating this legislation.
Okay, so I'm going to go totally off topic here because we were talking about CRA. I'm going to totally off topic, George, and you can pass on this question. So the head of CRA says to whatever governing body around the overpayment of some, I think, CERB or some emergency funds, it could be right across the board, any number of things. It totaled 15 billion. The headline read, head of CRA says it's not worth our time. Now, did you see that?
I did.
Do you have what's your view of that as a real estate investor, business owner, accountant extraordinaire? Do you have a view of that you want to share?
I understand the math. What I think is offensive at times is if we're going to try to do a materiality adjustment to see what we should or shouldn't spend time with, how can we justify the gazillions of different little small audits that go on for just there can't be any meat and potatoes in a lot of those audits. And so I understand, again, part of the theory is it's an enforcement, and if we let the small things go by, we need to still have examples so people follow the system, and to a large degree it's an honor system. But as we move more and more towards Big Brother watching us and the legislation I'm not a big fan of in the slightest, where they're close to kind of polishing off legislation that basically advisors will have to pre-notify or shortly thereafter a transaction notify Revenue Canada to basically say, we've just done this thing that we really don't want you to audit, but here's all the details we don't want you to have. Um, Let us know when we're going to get kicked in the nuts there and
Mhm.
go after us.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be, and this is done in other G20 countries as well, but
Sure.
Canada's now jumping onto it. And I think again, where we're self-policing to that degree, um, I I think we have some issues. That to me is, and don't get me wrong, I love playing with Revenue Canada, and there's the tit for tat, but there's mutual respect there too.
Sure. Of course.
And all of a sudden, that's really tipping the tables.
Yeah. So I didn't mean to go off on that tangent, but I just, it's one of those things that showed up. I just thought, it's showed up recently again for me. So that's why I brought it up. But let's go back to, BDO has been a trusted partner of the Real Estate Investment Network for a very long time. Many members comment just how good you guys are on the accounting side of things as with them and working in their business of investing in real estate. You're going to be talking at the upcoming conference and doing some conversation or anyways, you're going to be sharing some insights with the RAIN community, which you always do. Love it. When we look at what's going on for investors right now, and we've been talking about the CRA, but it's an ongoing conversation because we've got this, as a country, like many countries, we have a ballooning debt that's happening and a ballooning deficit. And, there's going to be some tax consequences. And of course, the CRA, the federal government, is going to look at very specific industries where things are a little messy and where things are really hot, and housing is one of those things. So, is there something that, investors need to really, we always are telling them, pay attention, do your books, get a great bookkeeper, have a great accountant. But is there anything that, that you want to share that we should be watching for coming through 2023?
To me, it's again, new pieces of legislation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for quite a number of years, yes, there's always going to be tweaks to the legislation,
Yeah.
slight changes to tax rates, things of that nature. That's probably going to happen for as long as Canada exists.
Mm-hmm.
But having something like really, it's a new type of tax. And I don't know about the average person, but to me, if I've got, for example, a cottage, it's not even an investment property that I get revenue off of, and I ensnare myself into this legislation and I'm tagged for it, and I pay my 1% tax, 1% on the value of my property, that's a lot of money.
It is.
And start adding up my properties. Again, not even mention, not even thinking about missing the deadline or getting penalties, just potentially paying the tax itself.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we can argue forever and a day, although between you and I, it'll be a short argument, I'm sure. But like, is this the right thing to be doing to entice people to come to the country and to bring in skilled labor and this, that, and the other thing? I can think of about 1,001 things that we could do before that.
Yeah, this conversation could go a long time with you and I, George.
Yes. But we start to see it piggybacking with
Yeah.
other legislation too, where now some of the foreign individuals aren't allowed to own the real estate, and we've seen the articles, you probably have as well, where healthcare professionals, for example, are saying, "Wait a minute, why bother coming to Canada if I can't even get a place?" It's not like Canada's the only game in the world.
Yeah.
So we do have to compete with the tax system, but for uh, now, it's watching. Wait a minute. I have to by April 30th file this return, and just to ensure that I don't get these penalties, the vast majority of people won't have to pay anything.
Mm-hmm.
There will be a few surprises, I'm sure,
Yeah.
and we'll have to plan around that for 2023 to see what can be done. But it's really my advice to people, and some Robin and I, we just kind of started listing our properties and started identifying, okay, what was the exemption available for that particular property? And did I have to file a return for the property? So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, if I have a corporation with 5 smaller properties into it, meaning a triplex or less, as a general rule here, I'm
Mm-hmm.
have to file 5 returns. I don't file one return for all 5 properties.
Wow.
More and more paperwork.
Yeah.
and it's not that it's a super complex form. I think there's a couple trick questions in there. I think
Mhm.
the real battle is figuring out, do you have to file and what are the implications? The form is, as government forms go, not too bad, but
Got to be
more-
done.
it's more paperwork. And then the accountants are crying, of course, because we have one or two other things that we typically do in March and April. So we weren't looking for the addition.
I don't need another thing to do.
No.
Well, for our listeners that are listening to this, there's a few things they need to do. Number one, get out to the R4 conference to hear George Dube from BDO talk about what's going on in the tax world and staying up to date. And certainly making sure as an investor that you do have a great bookkeeper, a great accountant, BDO and George Dube and BDO and the team. And I want to say something, George, that, you and I have talked about this many times over the years, and I've talked about it with my accountant, and that is that the changes within tax rules are sometimes very nuanced, as grand as they may be. There's so many nuances that have, and just the complexity has become such a point of view that if you as an accountant, you have to have a team of people, like you have to have special teams, if you will,
Yes.
those that understand GST, HST, income tax, corporate tax. I mean, there's so many different nuanced rules that the CRA is presented, and real estate investors are at the effect of it. And that's why we need good accountants.
Yes, for sure. And why, again, as smart as I think I am, I need an immense team around me.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's so invaluable. So, for example, with this um, underused housing tax that we're talking about, I've been chatting with some of my partners and team members that are specifically focused right now on that tax.
Right.
And it's fantastic being able to bounce ideas like, okay, this is how I interpret it, this is how they do, blah 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 blah,
Yeah.
and trying to get some of the intricacies, because we don't have a lot of background information in terms of how to interpret this legislation. Well, from an income tax perspective, this is how I would interpret some of that phrasing based on other sections. And they will have similar commentary based on the Excise Tax Act. And so trying to combine some of that, it, I think, does provide a lot more value to our clients. And for that matter, even non-clients trying to tap into some of the wealth of information that is available.
Well, all I got to do is say this, George. As a small business owner myself now for almost 40 years, and given my view of accounting and all things Excel spreadsheets and tax, I'm so grateful for individuals like yourself who think this stuff is fun. So kudos to you. I appreciate that we have accounting people on our teams. And so thanks for taking the time to share these insights with me today.
Thank
Everybody,
you.
get registered for our R4 conference. We're going to be talking about a ton of stuff. Lots of experts like George there to share their insights. So, George, thanks for your time today. Very much appreciated.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Looking forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah.